everybody. Welcome back to the Exponential Finance Podcast. Today I'm very excited to be here with Rohit Taneja, who's the founder and CEO of Decentro, an Indian open banking platform. Hello, Rohit. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Robert. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. Good to connect.
It's very great to have you. And I looked at your profile. So after you graduated, you actually spent a couple of years in Tokyo.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Tokyo is like Japan in general. It's pretty close to my heart. Love the Japanese people. Of course, I speak Japanese language as well. I learned there. Amazing country, must say, and amazing food as well. Yeah, it was heartbreaking to come back, but I had to, to really start off. Yeah.
So you had this desire to create your own company, basically. And in 2014, you founded your first company, then sold in 2017. What was that covering?
I think in the final year of my campus, pretty much like every final year student, I went through that dilemma, like what next? Then like the campus is done, university is done, where next to go, in the career. So of course, thought through a couple of scenarios. I had a desire to do masters and go into R&D, but then I realized that most of the times, if you go towards masters or PhD, like your research may or may not be practically applied. It might just become a research paper at the end of the day. Something which I was not comfortable with. So I said it has to be really driven by impact. Like at the end of the day, people should feel that yes, this is causing like a difference, like really making a difference in their lives. So at that time I was thinking, that what should be the plan ahead, and entrepreneurship came right to the top, in terms of impact, but at the same time quite risky as well. So as a college final year, I was like really not sure that do I have the stomach, to go for it right now, and especially without any like cash backup or savings in hand. So I said, okay, let's do one thing. Let's maybe get some corporate experience. Let's learn from some smart people out there. See how the market is evolving. And when I'm really passionate about one particular problem, I'll go and solve it. So that's how the career started. Went to work for Sony in Japan. And over those 2 years, I kept a very close track on the Indian ecosystem. And there was one pain point which I had faced in college, which was how do I really share money with my friends in a very seamless and friendly manner. Because money sharing has traditionally been very awkward. Like people don't like to have those money sharing conversations, especially with friends and colleagues. So we said, okay, it has to be fun so that people don't feel awkward about that. Kind of what Venmo has done in the US. And yes, that was the inspiration. And I came back in 2014. This is the sole mission that, okay, we need to solve this for India. Nobody has done it yet. And that's how it started.
In terms of where this ties into the Indian infrastructure, what happened in India over the last 10 years is pretty amazing with the Aadhaar ID first. When did the unified payment interface came out, and where did you start in relation to that? Is that tie-in or does this run in parallel?
Yeah, it is actually. It is closely tied. So when we were starting out in 2014, when I came back, at that time, of course, nothing like UPI was there, right? It was very painful to do, a bank API integration. It still is very painful. It was even more painful at that time. Because most of the banks were just in the phase of understanding what APIs are at that time. They were not really open to that. So UPI actually, I would say, it's actually like the inflection point for API banking in India. Because when that happened, then banks started realizing the power of opening up APIs. That's when they realized what smooth money flow can mean for the country, like what leverage it can have, for the economy. So that was an amazing thing to happen. And for sure, we were one of the first few early adopters of UPI as a company when it came in, along with a couple of others like PhonePe, JustPay, others which were there. Without UPI, it would have been very tough for us to scale up. So we leveraged that when it came in. So it came in 2015 as the early beta launch. In 2016, it went into production, which also was the time of us scaling up. And then, in 2017, it reached peak when we got acquired.
You're saying just even despite UPI in place, it's still painful to get a banking connection. Why is it still so difficult?
What UPI enabled was primarily easy movement of money between banks. But this is something that a lot of people are relate to because they are more of a consumer. They're not really building infrastructure. When they actually start building a company, then they realize that in order to use the APIs of UPI, you have to work with a bank. Like you cannot get the APIs directly from the government. So it's not really open source. It's like the banks are still the gatekeepers and you have to go through them, get the license, get the certification approved and then move forward. So at the end of the day, you have to work with a bank, like no question. So that is where the whole challenge comes in. Because as pretty much everyone knows, like working with banks is a very painful thing, both in terms of technology and in terms of the business process. still continues to be.
And so that is the problem that you're ultimately trying to solve with Decentro now.
Absolutely.
And what functionality do you introduce with Decentro to make it a smoother experience?
So if you break down this, banking integration, what happens is like, let us say, if I take my example, right, when we were integrating the previous company with a bank, we took like 6 months to do one API integration, half of a year just with one single bank and one single API, And it's not changed that much. Like even right now, it's 4 to 5 months average time that a company takes. It doesn't matter which one. And if you break it down, to the first principles of why does it take so long, the first few months are primarily they consumed in the technology back and forth, where you're consuming time in conversations with the tech team because something is broken in their documentation, in the sandbox, things are not clear. There are bugs which are not supposed to happen. The documentation says something else, the code does something else. And it's fairly common. And the reason for that is banks are not really product thinkers. They're not product companies. They have been built around servicing consumers, not really building products. And they don't really have that incentive, to revamp the entire, product architecture. So that's where the first few months go. And once you cross that hurdle, then you land in the business, the compliance, and legal approvals, which is a whole different battle that you have to consume another 2 months. It's like, something I tell a lot of people that you must have played that game, on iPad, which is like Temple Run. It feels like that Temple Run. It's like you're running from one port to another port, and you have to coordinate with all of them, with all the departments in the bank. Well, now, that's like the problem. Now, what we are solving there is, since we know that this is the exact problem, we are standardizing, right? Because think of it as, if we as a fintech company have done that once, there should be no reason for every fintech company to do that same thing over and over again. Because we can create a standardized layer on top of it to cover the first technical component and also the next business component. Really open it up in the form of standard streamlined APIs. A great analog to think of it is Amazon Web Services. At the back end of Amazon Web Services, you have these hundreds and thousands of different kinds of servers, right? Now, since Amazon has done those integrations, every company gets a standard integration. It doesn't matter which server or which part of the world you are in. That's exactly the way we're thinking of it.
So you're essentially taking the experience that you've gained with the previous company where you had to go into all the detail and build the connections and create a standardized abstracted layer on top. So if I'm a fintech, I can go in and I have one interface, and the 10 different flavors of different data standards, formats, you're kind of hiding from me. If I look at possible competition or comparison, that would be like a TrueLayer or a token type of company, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. TrueLayer, definitely, of course, albeit in a very different geography. Then Galileo Financial in the US, right? Synapsify also in the US. Yeah, a couple of similar companies.
Okay. Of course, it's a super interesting market because I think everybody woke up when Visa paid $5 billion almost for Plate. And that's not even API driven. It's mostly screen scraping. So we've got the better technology. So primarily focused on the Indian market then at the moment?
At the moment, yes. But we do have a larger vision because I see APAC to be in a similar boat in the sense that a lot of countries are evolving towards open banking. And in fact, India is turning out to be a role model for a lot of countries in terms of API. So definitely, I think we are in a good place.
And you were part of the Y-Combinator batch now, and so that's part of your funding, and you've raised your seed round essentially, is that correct?
That's right.
You've chosen Bangalore because it is still and will never lose the status as the number one tech center in India. But it's also, the fight for talent is pretty hard, isn't it? How big is your team now, and where did you get the people from?
I think Bangalore is, there are definitely major pros and cons, of really working in Bangalore. One of the things that really helps me out is that the weather is amazing, right? Which really makes sure that, you are in a good state of mind, at all times, So you're not frustrated by the weather or, random stuff which is happening in the city. So that's a great thing. And that eventually translates to a lot of techies getting attracted because of opportunities and pay and everything, of course. From a talent perspective, it's more about the culture and really making sure that you create the right culture and then you attract the best people eventually. That's what we are aiming for. We're very small right now. We're just 12 people. Definitely hiring more as we go along.
Do you think that the culture you're building now is different from your first company because the business is different or because you've learned certain things that you want to do differently now?
actually. So I think the first one was very heavily B2C oriented. We were building a mobile app, and the frequency of iteration and the way we were thinking about it was very different. Right? Because in B2C, like there's this classic saying that, it's like, it's mostly better to rely on your gut, than to rely on what the customer is saying, because the customers might say something, but they might do something else. But that doesn't work in B2B. In B2B, the good thing is like, what your customer is saying, he'll actually do that, right? Because he's a business and he's actually relying on you for putting your software. So that's something which is very different. So we're now relying very heavily on our customers to understand what our roadmap should be and what our pipeline should be, right, in terms of development and priorities. That's one fundamental difference. I think second is, I think the first one, at some point of time, I compromised on a couple of people, in terms of hiring. So I wasn't really 100% proud of them, maybe later after exiting, and I would have probably had someone else instead of them at that point in time. But nonetheless, it worked out decently well at that time. And I think this time I'm setting the bar much higher, making sure that, yes, only if I'm 100% comfortable will I take them on board. Otherwise, so that's another major difference that's happening. Yeah.
It could be startups, but it could also be obviously established companies that are using your infrastructure. What are some of the initial use cases that you're seeing? Where's the wave coming from in India?
I think in the early stages, we're definitely trying to get as many fast-moving customers, fast-moving companies as possible. They act as like great sources of feedback for us. So that's one. But yeah, eventually we are framing a path for reaching out to enterprises, which will give us massive scale over time. At this point, there are quite a few customer categories that are coming inbound very heavily. And in fact, inbound is a great channel that's worked very well for us. So definitely, I think that's something we've done very right, I would say, on that front. And these tend to be like marketplaces and neobanks, like if I were to name two categories. Yeah, these are like, I would say, the early adopting heavy categories for our case as we start, yeah.
Are you in a position where you're saying you need to be selective, given the scale with 12 people, that you can't take every inquiry or every customer? So essentially, you need to form an opinion on the ecosystem and what are possible clients who would grow fast so that you're growing fast as well.
So definitely in fact, we do not discriminate purely because of volumes, for sure. But we do take a call on the pipeline. Right? So for example, we get a lot of queries from outside India, people who want to enter India and build a neobank, right? And so for that, for example, some of our features and product modules are not even ready for those use cases. So then we need to evaluate that, okay, how many customers are out there which are international, would we want to serve them? And, at the risk of compromising on the product quality on the other side. So that's a call that we actively take. And we want to make sure that, we just do justice to our customers who have placed trust very early on.
What do you think was kind of an estimate based on the experience so far compared to the 5 months in your first experience with your first startup using your technology and infrastructure? How much in terms of time spent, effort in person days, or also the time to market would it save using your infrastructure?
Yeah, it's actually 10x, and that's a metric that we are very proud of and we do very closely track. We want to make sure that 10x goes to even like 20x, and even more as we go along. So if you actually do 10x, that from 5 months, it comes down to 2 weeks, which is the exact timeline, that our early customers had taken when they went live. So yeah, that's the experience that we have brought to the table. And it's much more streamlined where, the number of times they have to interact with our tech team goes down drastically because it becomes like a very intuitive self-serve model. And we're trying to reduce those instances where, we even need to disturb the tech team for any new integration. When the customer comes in, he is able to understand everything intuitively. He's able to integrate on his own.
When I look at Europe, many of the initial use cases were just account aggregation, and banks were slow to offer premium APIs, let's say, beyond the scope that was in PSD2. What's the position of the Indian banks at this point? How open are they to open banking, right? Are they engaged and they see it as an opportunity in building more functionality that you can leverage?
They do actually. So interestingly, we have received I think good tailwinds in this year due to two reasons. One is, of course, there is a healthy competition between the banks. The banks, at the end of the day, are ultimately competing for customers, and the volumes. So So the good thing is that the more banks open up their APIs, better the competition gets. Yeah. So then the banks are competing with each other to open up even more APIs. Although, of course, the quality is not changing, which is to our advantage because we thrive on that. So that's one major tailwind that's coming. The second tailwind is COVID has actually accelerated the entire digital adoption journey. So now we have banks who have not got any customers, right, physically on the branch channel because nobody's going back, right? So they're like really hungry to open up their APIs in as fast a time as possible, right? So like that entire digital journey that they had planned for 5 years, 10 years has now been compressed to 6 months. So that's an amazing second thing that happened.
When you look at the typical Indian consumer, and of course, right, it's a huge country, it's very diverse, different levels of wealth, but how many bank accounts would a typical Indian resident have?
Varies very, very drastically because, in India, the difference between the tier 1, and the lower cities is like very, very drastic. And most people underestimate that difference. It's huge. If you take the top 1% and about 90%. Yeah, so I think if you look at the tier 1, people like us live in the tier 1 metro cities and lead a very active, financially, stable life. Yeah, I think it's average, I would say minimum two bank accounts, probably even more. It might have gone higher now that neobanks are coming in, so it could actually for sure go higher. And in the villages and in tier 3 cities, I think more tier 3 cities, tier 2 is still decently well. Tier 3 for sure, it would be, I think, 1, and many people don't even have bank accounts, that's also there.
Correct.
Probably less than 1 would be the average there.
What is the landscape for neobanks? Is there a specific regulatory regime that you can have a virtual banking license like in Hong Kong or in Singapore? How does this work in India?
India does not have a license yet, but something is in the works for sure because RBI has been thinking for a long time. And now they're really getting this competitive pressure from so many neobanks trying to enter in. So I think something will come out, but my hunch is it won't be as fast as people expect. It will take at least a couple of years to really formalize, maybe even more. And but yeah, I think India might go for a virtual banking license at some point of time. That's my gut feeling based on all that I've seen. But yeah, at this point of time, nothing like that. So you have to ride on top of a bank, and leverage that.
Also, ultimately, beyond open banking, I think I also saw that on your website. You've been talking about open finance or open data, right, in general. And can you describe that vision a bit more?
So neobanks are, even though they are a good category for us, right, but they're only a handful, right, of neobanks out there. And even more so, there will be a lot of M&A in this segment, right? Ultimately, maybe 10 might survive, So we're not really relying on just the neobanks as a category. I think this is a fundamental belief, which is actually something we very strongly believe in, is that most of the companies in the future, at some point in time, will have a significant portion of the revenue coming in from a segment of financial services, be it marketplaces, be it massive consumer manufacturing like Apple, Xiaomi, so on and so forth, right? So yeah, that's the more attractive thing, which I would say, where customers are able to get their exact financial needs served where they need on the company they want. So yeah, that's the direction that we had in, and yeah, really bullish on that.
The case study that you've written about on Medium as well, with Zoozle as a marketplace, which is ultimately then a much bigger market than the number of banks or neobanks that would be out there. So that's the direction it's going in. Okay.
Absolutely.
So what is your near-term roadmap? Because you talked about some of the banks or the neobanks that come and look at the market, you still have a functionality gap. So assume that needs to be addressed. And so there's some focus on filling that and then focus on India. At which point would you be looking at the next market?
Yeah, I think it will happen sooner than we had thought. One of the things that we're figuring out is beyond the current goals that we are already working on, and we have definitely a good pipeline lined up, both in terms of the number of customers and the product features, at least for the next, I would say, 8 months to 1 year, for the Indian market. Something we are trying to find out is that how best can we leverage this exists, our stack, and try to replicate some of that success into some of the other markets without, of course, getting too much distracted. And it will be in the sequential manner. So we will pick one of the markets outside India, preferably a developing, market, which is very fast growing on both the banking side as well as the customer fintech side. And then try to see, like say, if there's a heavy demand from the marketplace side, right, which is a strong category for us. And we do see that happening in a couple of countries in Southeast Asia. So definitely try to leverage on that, bring us back there, leverage the banking connections, and then get rolling. So yes, that's going to be an important aspect for us to decide. Definitely, I think sometime in the next year, you will see us in one other countries as well. Yeah.
India itself is a huge market and is developing so quickly. But if you then take whatever Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia into this, you're getting very quickly to like a quarter at least of the world population, right? And leaving China aside for a moment. Very, very exciting. Maybe one question just to roll back a bit. When you were looking at creating your next venture, was it based on the experience that you had with your first company, was it a foregone conclusion that you would now go and resolve these problems, or did you think about other options as well?
I have always been able to get attracted only to problems that I have faced myself. I've seen founders solve problems which are not in their domain, which they have not faced but somebody else has faced. And it's a good thing, that works out. But it's very hard for me to relate to that, right? I can't relate to, a problem that I've not faced, honestly. So that's one. That was a major deciding factor because this was something I faced personally in scaling the company, the previous one. And I see that being faced, of course, everywhere else. That was one. But actually, I did give fair thought to a lot of other challenges which we had faced. Like, for example, one of the things that we were evaluating is that how do you really do for a 0 to 1 start, like when you're scaling from 0 to 10, in terms of number of employees, there is no fixed marketing playbook. In the sense that more than marketing, it's like there's no fixed growth playbook. We will take different growth strategies and different work out of them. But I was thinking that is there some common trend that emerges out of it? And can we build a SaaS company based on that? Right? And maybe help other companies grow from 0 to 10. So that is one thing which I think can be a fantastic problem to solve. And I do see a couple of people thinking on that front. So that was one idea which I evaluated. Then there was another one which was around crypto. I was thinking, so I've been fascinated by blockchain. I traded heavily into crypto and then, toned it down a bit after India tied the knot on the crypto holdings. But yeah, so that is another fascinating, like blockchain in general is the wide scope, but then I think it's still yet to find its footing in terms of scalability. And it's still in the infrastructure phase. So yeah, that was another one. But finally zero down on this one, which was more relatable, timing went right, and it definitely seems much more impactful. If you would like to share it with your followers, we are definitely open to new team members. So we are in that phase of really getting more smart people as we go along. And so we set the bar higher every time we hire. So it becomes, looking for really much more smarter than even myself and everybody else in the team. So yeah, definitely something we would love to share,
Wonderful. This was great, Rohit. Thank you very much for taking the time and sharing your story.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great weekend.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.